For today's final reading from Unto This Last, the second half of the final essay, Ad Valorem, we have a larger panel than usual, and I would like to introduce them to you now. Our convener for today, as he was for the previous session in April, is James L. Spates. Jim, as we know him, is the Distinguished Professor of Sociology Emeritus, Hobart and William Smith Colleges, Geneva, New York. An author, including of a forthcoming book on Unto This Last and related matters, which he told us a little earlier he has just completed and is now looking for a publisher and would welcome conversations with any publishers here present. He is a long-standing guild companion and co-founder of the Ruskin Society of North America. He's also the webmaster of the remarkable wide-ranging blog, Why Ruskin? He's published a number of books and articles on sociology, as well as, relative to his Ruskin work, reviewing the book, The Imperfect Round, Helen Gill Filyoun's Life of Ruskin, and a series of scholarly articles reassessing important aspects of Ruskin's biography, including his mental illness and sexuality. Rachel Dickinson is reader in interdisciplinary studies and English at Manchester Metropolitan University, where she is co-director of the Long 19th Century Network. Her research, publication, and engagement activity all flow from a specialism in John Ruskin, which began with doctoral work on archival correspondence. She conceived and coordinated a bicentenary Festival of Ruskin in Manchester in 2019, and then a follow-on Everyone Deserves Space, Ruskin's Manchester Now 2022, with Sue Andy and the National Black Arts Alliance. Her publications include articles on Ruskin, art and textiles, and she is indeed writing a monograph on Ruskin and textiles. In 2019, she was elected the first female master of our guild. Tyson Gaskill is Executive Director of Communications and Events at USC Libraries, where he's overseen the library's cultural programs since 2001. In addition, he curates about half a dozen exhibitions a year on campus, covering the entire spectrum of human endeavor, frequently touching on the intersection between the arts and the sciences. He's also responsible for producing the library's annual Scripter Award fundraiser and the public programs at the annual Los Angeles Archives Bazaar. Prior to joining USC, he spent 10 years as an associate editor at the Getty Research Institute, working on exhibitions, printed ephemera, and various treatises on architecture and aesthetics. He earned degrees in history and art history from UCLA and says that he is still in the nascent stages of Ruskin mania. Some of you may feel you are long past that stage in your lives. Howard Hill has been the director and the curator of Ruskin's former home, Brantwood, since 1996, restoring the house and its gardens and adding substantially to its collections. He's curated a large number of historic and contemporary exhibitions, exploring Ruskin's life and ideas and their relevance today. He's also lectured internationally on Ruskin and contributed to a wide range of publications. Howard is a companion and a former director of the Guild of St. George, a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, and a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society. Pamela Hull lives and works at Brantwood, where her husband, Howard Hull, is the director. She has a degree in psychology and business and is a CPA. She came to the UK in 1989 when she replaced the finance director at the energy services segment of Cooper Industries. Before being transferred to a job in Germany, she and Howard traveled to Brantwood on a dark October day in 1991. And she describes it as having been a spiritual experience to stand in the turret window of Ruskin's bedroom, where he stood and observed what he saw. Since coming to Brantwood at the end of 1996, she's described it as a privilege to connect with people from all over the world and to engage in the many issues which plague humankind in our time. She is worship and outreach minister for Coniston and Torver and director of a company within the footwear sector. She plays the piano, the organ, and the French horn, and sings in the Ambleside Choral Society, and is secretary of the Friends of Ruskin's Brantwood. And finally, poet-journalist Gabriel Mayer is an award-winning foreign correspondent who's lived and worked throughout the Middle East, the Balkans, and East Africa. He was awarded an honorary doctorate in recognition of his work as a journalist by the Dominican School of Philosophy and Theology at UC Berkeley in 2017 and by Lancaster University in the UK in 2022. He has published poetry and 2 novels and a large-scale non-fiction work, The Testimony of Stones, a biography of Jerusalem's Church of the Holy Sepulchre, is awaiting publication. He has been involved with the historic Ruskin Art Club since 1998 and currently serves as its executive director. He too has lectured widely on Ruskinian themes, most recently at Notre Dame University, where he delivered the 2nd annual Ruskin lecture in 2022, sponsored by the Riley Center for Science, Technology and Values, focused on Ruskin and ecology. His essay, Ruskin and the California Dream, appears in the latest edition of the Ruskin Review, published by Lancaster University, and he too is a companion of the Guild. So these are your distinguished Ruskinian contributors today. And now I'm delighted to hand over to Jim as our convener, who will introduce tonight's final readings. Jim.
Thank you very much, Simon. Did we forget Tyson, or was I just drifting?
You were just drifting.
Okay, good. So we're all here and wonderful, and welcome to everybody who's coming from all over the world to these sessions. I want to say a couple of words by way of framing what we're going to be doing today. The first is I want to remind everybody of the metaphor that is the basis of this wonderful book of 4 essays. The title of Ruskin's work, as we all know, is Unto This Last. And the phrase comes from the parable, Christ's parable of the vineyard owner and his workers in the Gospel according to Matthew, I think it's chapter 20. In any event, the way in which that proceeded to be told a long time ago was that some of Jesus's followers came to him and said, Master, you're always talking about this place called the kingdom of heaven. What was it like? We've not been there. So Jesus looked at them and said, well, I can't tell you and I can't take you there, but I can tell you what it's like. I'm going to tell you what it's like by telling you a story. There was once a vineyard owner, and it was the fall of the year, and it was time to harvest the grapes. And he said, I need some men to go out into the field and harvest the grapes. So he went to the market very early in the day, and he hired a group of men, and he said, would you come and work for me in the vineyard, and I will pay you what is right. And they agreed, and he sent him off with the foreman of the fields to the vineyard. And then around noontime, it became very clear, it was a hot day, it became very clear that he needed more workers. So he went to the market again and said to other people who were still not hired, he said, could you come to the vineyard and work for me, and I will pay you what you deserve for the work that you do. They agreed, and he sent them off. And then again, he went about 4 o'clock, and he's still standing around. He said, well, why haven't you gone to work? And they said, no man has hired us. He said, well, I will hire you, and I will pay you what is right. And they agreed, and they too went to the vineyard. And finally, about 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, it was just getting to be dusk. He said, I just need a few more. And he went to the vineyard, went to the place where the men stood to be hired. And he found a few more men. And he said, and I will hire you and pay you what is right. And so they all went to the vineyard, and they worked until it was dark. And then at the end of their session of work, he said to the foreman, bring all the men in, and I will pay them what I promised to pay them, beginning with those I hired last. And so he came in, and the ones who came in last, he paid a penny a day to, because a penny a day in those days was not an insubstantial amount of money. It was an amount of money that would allow them to maintain themselves and have enough left over to clothe their families and feed their families back home. So he paid them, and he said, now bring me the second group. The second group hired at 6 o'clock at night, went up, and he paid them also a penny a day. The people who had been paid, people who had been hired at the very early part of the day at 6 in the morning, were a little disgruntled by this. Then he got to the third group, the people who had been hired at 4 o'clock, and he said, and I will pay you, and he paid them a penny a day. By then it was sort of rebellion in the ranks, and the people who had been hired the people who had been hired earlier were quite upset and spoke ill of the vineyard owner. And he looked at them and he said, "Friends, you do me wrong. Because I'm good and I pay people the amount of money that they need. You get angry with me." He said, "I will pay unto this last as unto thee." And when that last group came up, the ones that had been hired first, he also paid them a penny a day, a penny for their work for the day, because that was the amount of money they needed to live decently for the day. And that he said, I will pay unto this last, that's the metaphor of the book, unto this last as to thee. And they took their money, and I think they got the lesson, because the idea was that he had given each person who had worked for him exactly what that person needed in order to stay alive and stay well. Unto this last as to thee. That's the metaphor that Ruskin chose for the essays that he was going to write on political economy. And they said, "Thank you." And he said, "Well, and that's what the kingdom of heaven is like." We have 4 essays in the Unto This Last book. The first is called The Roots of Honor, and I'm going to give you a very brief summary just to remind us all of where we are of each, not a summary of each, but a brief interpretation of each. You may disagree with my interpretation. If so, we can take that up during the discussion. The first one is called The Roots of Honor, and introduces something that, as far as I know, had never truly been introduced in any detail in the political economic literature of the time. He says, what are the reasons for all these people who do these different jobs in the world? What is a physician's work? What is a lawyer's work? What is a laborer's work? What is anybody's work for? And basically, the answer to the question of the roots of honor is that the roots of honor are service. We hire people, whomever they may be, to do some sort of service for us. We go to our garage mechanic to fix our car. We go to our gardener to help with our gardens. We go to our teachers to teach us the things that are needed to be known in life, and so on. We go to our physicians to be made healthy. We go to our lawyers to see that justice is done. The roots of honor are service. And to me, and Ruskin talks about this whole theory of the emotions and taking care of other people as being the central element in his first essay, The Roots of Honor, which we discussed some months ago. The second essay is called The Veins of Wealth. And the burden of that essay is really, I think, in the end, really quite simple. He's trying to say, what are we fundamentally trying to do when we hire people and have them work for us? And his answer is, we're trying to make them healthy and strong human beings. The veins of wealth are healthy, strong human beings who are able to do the work that is needed in the world with the talents that they have. And then he finally then gets to the third essay. Now he's deep into political economic theory. And the question is, well, what's just payment for anybody? Which, of course, is going back to the metaphor of unto this last. And the answer is, and he answers it by using the frescoes in Siena, which we showed during our session on this third essay, again some months back. The whole idea of if you want a great city, a great place for human beings to live, it has to be a place that takes care of them, that serves them fundamentally in terms of their human needs. So just payment, which is a central issue in all economic work, just payment, he said, is to pay somebody exactly what they need in order to stay alive and stay healthy, so that when they come to work tomorrow, they will be able to work at the same level of strength and skill that they had in the day that you first hired them. So this was a relatively revolutionary concept at Ruskin's time, because many employers hired people at whatever pay that we could get them to take. The cheaper, the better. Ruskin says, no, you pay them what they need. That's really important. Otherwise, you lead them to disease, you lead them to dissension. You pay them what they need. So the third essay is really about justice and what is just payment, which brings us to the fourth essay, which we did more or less the first half of in the last session that we had, which is the question of ad valorem. What is the value? So and this is where Ruskin, for the first time, truly gets down to some kind of crucial definitions in his theory of economics, something that he will continue in later works later on. He asks, what is value? And what gives anything value? And he says what gives anything value is that it avails towards life. It has in it, whatever it is, whether it's a book, an orange, or a view of a beautiful mountain scene, it has in it an ability to give us a certain amount of human strength. It avails towards life. That is its value. And that value is intrinsic to the thing, and no amount of money you pay for it. You can pay a penny for it, or you can pay $1 million for it. Will change the amount of value that it possesses for life. It could be a copy of Hamlet. It has so much life in it. So he defines value, then he defines wealth. And the definition that he gives of wealth is that essentially is that amount of wherewithal that sustains life and allows it to be stronger. So he defines value, he defines wealth, he defines production, he defines consumption. Production are those things which we create, which support life. And consumption is the fundamental idea that we are trying to get people, human beings, to consume the things that will make them stronger. That is what we thought. We should never be involved in anything that weakens or harms human beings. We should always be involved in only those things that sustain life. So that's about as far as we got, which is the essential list of the main concepts that he defines in the first half of this last essay, ad valorem, which brings us to today's discussion. And we're going to start with Rachel in just a moment. The fundamental idea is, now that we've got these key terms determined, is then how do we use them as we think about this issue of how do we treat human beings in the market. So I think at this point it's good to start our reading, and I will turn it over to Rachel, and she will begin with our first paragraph, which is, Simon, remind me, 77, is it?
76.
Paragraph 76, if you're following on onto this last, and then we will proceed person by person till we get to a break about halfway through. Go ahead, Rachel.
Lovely. Thank you, Jim. The final object of political economy, therefore, is to get good method of consumption and great quantity of consumption. In other words, to use everything and to use it nobly, whether it be substance, service, or service-perfecting substance. The most curious error in Mr. Mill's entire work, provided for him originally by Ricardo, is his endeavor to distinguish between direct and indirect service, and consequent assertion that a demand for commodities is not demand for labor. He distinguishes between laborers employed to lay out pleasure grounds and to manufacture velvet, declaring that it makes material difference to the laboring classes in which of these two ways a capitalist spends his money. Because the employment of the gardeners is a demand for labor, but the purchase of velvet is not. Error colossal as well as strange. It will indeed make a difference to the laborer whether we bid him swing his scythe in the spring winds or drive the loom in pestilent air. But so far as his pocket is concerned, it makes to him absolutely no difference whether we order him to make green velvet with seed and a scythe, or red velvet with silk and scissors. Neither does it anywise concern him whether, when the velvet is made, we consume it by walking on it or wearing it, so long as our consumption of it is wholly selfish. But if our consumption is to be in any wise unselfish, not only our mode of consuming the articles we require interests him, but also the kind of article we require with a view to consumption. And thus, returning for a moment to Mr. Mill's great hardware theory, it matters, so far as the laborer's immediate profit is concerned, not an iron filing, whether I employ him in growing a peach or forging a bombshell. But my probable mode of consumption of those articles matters seriously. Admit that it is to be in both cases unselfish, and the difference to him is final, whether when his child is ill, I walk into his cottage and give it the peach, or drop the shell down his chimney and blow his roof off. The worst of it for the peasant is that the capitalist's consumption of the peach is apt to be selfish, and of the shell, distributive. But, in all cases, this is the broad and general fact, that on due catalytic commercial principles, somebody's roof must go off in fulfillment of the bomb's destiny. You may grow for your neighbor at your liking grapes or grape shot. He will also, catalytically, grow grapes or grape shot for you, and you will each reap what you have sown.
Thank you, Rachel. I forgot to mention one thing in my introduction. I will mention it very briefly now, and that is that after the second essay of Unto This Last was published in the Cornhill magazine, Ruskin was visited by the editor of that magazine, a novelist by the name of William Makepeace Thackeray. And Thackeray said that there had been so much protest against the essays that Ruskin had been putting forth and the recommendations that he was making regarding healthy and humane treatment of other people, that the publishing house, which was Smith Elder, was going to refuse to publish any more than 2 more essays. The third essay, which he was preparing at the time, Thackeray said they would publish, and he would then be allowed only 1 more, although the original agreement had been for 7 essays on political economy. Ruskin had already written drafts of all of these other essays that were yet to come. But he said, we feel very badly about this. This is a kind of censorship, and you are one of the most prominent writers of the age. And so in a modest degree of atonement, we will allow you to make your last essay of double length. It can be twice the length of the earlier ones, which were really quite brief. Ruskin agreed to this. The reason I tell you this now is that this last essay, the Ad Valorem, is this compromise essay. It is an essay, it's the 4th essay of the set of 4, but it really is in essence a combination of 4 essays, which means in effect that many of the things that Ruskin would have said in the essays that were never published appear here and appear in lengthy footnotes, which we'll get to in a moment. I forgot to say that. You should regard this last essay as a very importantly different one from the earlier ones. So thank you, Rachel. And now I think we will go to Gabriel, who has actually the delight of reading what many people think is the most important paragraph of the entire book, Unto This Last.
Thank you, Jim. It is therefore the manner and issue of consumption which are the real tests of production. Production does not consist in things laboriously made, but in things serviceably consumable. And the question for the nation is not how much labor it employs, but how much life it produces. For as consumption is the end and aim of production, so life is the end and aim of consumption. I left this question to the reader's thought 2 months ago, choosing rather that he should work it out for himself than have it sharply stated to him. But now, the ground being sufficiently broken, and the details into which the several questions here opened must lead us, being too complex for discussion in the pages of a periodical, so that I must pursue them elsewhere, I desire in closing the series of introductory papers to leave this one great fact clearly stated. There is no wealth but life. Life, including all its powers of love, of joy, and of admiration. That country is the richest, which nourishes the greatest number of noble and happy human beings. That man is richest who, having perfected the functions of his own life to the utmost, has also the widest, helpful influence, both personal and by means of his possessions, over the lives of others. A strange political economy. The only one, nevertheless, that ever was or can be. All political economy founded on self-interest, being but the fulfillment of that which once brought schism into the policy of angels and ruin into the economy of heaven.
Pamela, it's your turn.
The greatest number of human beings noble and happy. But is the nobleness consistent with the number? Yes, not only consistent with it, but essential to it. The maximum of life can only be reached by the maximum of virtue. In this respect, the law of human population differs wholly from that of animal life. The multiplication of animals is checked only by want of food and by the hostility of races. The population of the gnat is restrained by the hunger of the swallow, and that of the swallow by the scarcity of gnats. Man, considered as an animal, is indeed limited by the same laws. Hunger or plague or war are the necessary and only restraints upon his increase. Effectual restraints, hitherto his principal study having been how most swiftly to destroy himself or ravage his dwelling places, and his highest skill directed to give range to the famine, seed to the plague, and sway to the sword. But considered as other than an animal, his increase is not limited by these laws. It is limited only by the limits of his courage and his love. Both of these have their bounds and ought to have. His race also has its bounds, but these bounds have not yet been reached, nor will be reached for ages. In all the ranges of human thought, I know none so melancholy as the speculations of political economists on the population question. It is proposed to better the condition of the laborer by giving him higher wages. Nay, says the economist, if you raise his wages, he will either people down to the point of misery at which you found him, or drink your wages away. He will, I know it. Who gave him this will? Suppose it were your own son of whom you spoke, declaring to me that you dared not take him into your firm, nor even give him his just laborer's wages, because if you did, he would die of drunkenness and leave half a score of children to the parish. Who gave your son these dispositions, I should inquire. Has he them by inheritance or by education? By one or other they must come, and as in him, so also in the poor. Either these poor are of a race essentially different from ours and unredeemable, which, however often implied, I have heard none yet openly say, or else by such care as we have ourselves received, we may make them continent and sober as ourselves, wise and dispassionate as we are, models arduous of imitation. But, it is answered, they cannot receive education. Why not? That is precisely the point at issue. Charitable persons suppose the worst fault of the rich is to refuse the people meat. And the people cry for their meat, kept back by fraud, to the Lord of multitudes. Alas, it is not meat of which the refusal is cruelest, or to which the claim is validest. The life is more than meat. The rich not only refuse food to the poor, they refuse wisdom. They refuse virtue. They refuse salvation. Ye sheep without shepherd, it is not the pasture that has been shut from you, but the presence, meat. Perhaps your right to that may be pleadable, but other rights have to be pleaded first. Claim your crumbs from the table if you will, but claim them as children, not as dogs. Claim your right to be fed, but claim more loudly your right to be holy, perfect, and pure.
Tyson.
Strange words to be used of working people. What? Holy. Without any long robes or anointing oils? These rough-jacketed, rough-worded persons set to nameless, dishonored service? Perfect. These with dim eyes and cramped limbs and slowly wakening minds? Pure. These with sensual desire and groveling thought, foul of body and coarse of soul? It may be so. Nevertheless, such as they are the holiest, perfectest, purest persons the earth can at present show. They may be what you have said, but if so, they yet are holier than we who have left them thus. But what can be done for them? Who can clothe? Who teach? Who restrain their multitudes? What end can there be for them at last, but to consume one another? I hope for another end, though not, indeed, from any of the three remedies for overpopulation commonly suggested by economists.
And now we go to one of those long footnotes that I told you about a few moments ago. As those of you listening probably have had a sense, Ruskin was often accused of being a socialist, even a communist, and he always claimed that he was neither. One of the long footnotes in this essay, Howard is going to read for us, where he essentially goes after the argument of socialism. Howard?
Observe, in these statements, I am not taking up, nor countenancing one whit, the common socialist idea of division of property. Division of property is its destruction, and with it, the destruction of all hope, all industry, and all justice. It is simply chaos, a chaos towards which the believers in modern political economy are fast tending, and from which I am striving to save them. The rich man does not keep back meat from the poor by retaining his riches, but by basely using them. Riches are a form of strength, and a strong man does not injure others by keeping his strength, but by using it injuriously. The socialist, seeing a strong man oppress a weak one, cries out, "Break the strong man's arms." But I say, teach him to use them to better purpose. The fortitude and intelligence which acquire riches are intended by the giver of both, not to scatter, nor to give away, but to employ those riches in the service of mankind. In other words, in the redemption of the erring and aid of the weak. That is to say, there is first to be the work to gain money, and then the Sabbath for use for it. The Sabbath whose law is not to lose life, but to save. It is continually the fault or the folly of the poor that they are poor, as it is usually a child's fault if it falls into a pond, and a cripple's weakness that slips at a crossing. Nevertheless, most passers-by would pull the child out or help up the cripple. Put it at the worst that all the poor of the world are but disobedient children or careless cripples. and that all rich people are wise and strong, and you will see at once that neither is the socialist right in desiring to make everybody poor, powerless, and foolish as he is himself, nor the rich man right in leaving the children in the mire.
Thank you, Howard. And now, folks, if we, Simon, I think now it's time for our break. We'll have a bit of a discussion for perhaps 5 minutes, and Simon will be our timekeeper.
Okay.
Must have generated some ideas in our audience or our readers.
So this is a chance, yes, for
well, I'll just start it off with
Jim, you start.
What I think is not a very simple, but a very important observation, which is here's Ruskin essentially advocating for the education and care of the poor, the weak, and the uneducated. In the England of his day, not quite so much in the England of your day, these people were seen as inferior human beings, and they didn't deserve any taking care of by the state or anybody else. Ruskin, this is one of the reasons his political economy was so deeply opposed by so many people. Ruskin is proposing these people are poor, perhaps some of because of their own faults, but largely because we have refused to give them the education. We have refused to give them their penny a day, and so they cannot put food on the table. We are responsible for all the misery surrounding us fundamentally, and we should not be. This strange words, as Tyson read, strange words to be said of working people in the middle of the 19th century. So this argument that the poor or the lesser advantaged are equal to the rest of us if we but gave them the opportunity to be so was very radical in his time. And England has responded to that in some measure. My own country has responded to that in some measure, much less than England.
Anyone else want to chip in thoughts, reflections?
Howard and I were discussing this, and we all had and it took issue with the idea of the fault or folly of the poor, that they are poor continually, the fault or folly of the poor, that they are poor. Howard had an interesting thought when it came to that, and so I'm just going to say that right now so that he can enter into the discussion.
Well, I wondered in terms of the use of the word fault, that fault from our perspective often is used to mean it's that they're to blame. But a fault can be something of a condition rather than necessarily a blame. So, you know, it's the you might say it's the difficulty of the poor. It's the condition of the poor. I mean, it's a fault in the sense that it's a dysfunction, but it's not a blame. It's not their fault in the sense of blame. It's their condition in terms of where they are at.
It's the way that you got to it that's really interesting, because Howard got to the idea of fault and thinking about Ruskin's love of geology and fault, in a specimen, fault in a rock.
You talk of fault lines, but you don't blame the rock for having a fault line. It's not, you say, you silly rock, you've got a fault. So I think there's an element of that. And I think also the other thing is that taken out of context, those lines would be absolutely appalling, but they are instantly countered by what Ruskin goes on to say about, how we couldn't pass by these people in difficulty without stooping to help them, by stopping to help them. He's already told us actually where the blame lies, if you want. That we're not that maybe we're not recognizing that life is more than meat, that actually it's a wholeness of the person that we need to value and to cherish and to support. and that's something that we have to give to people who haven't had the opportunity to have it and to have it cultivated in them or be helped with it, or whose conditions are so wretched that, frankly, they can do nothing more than hope for me.
I think at its simplest, this is really a call on us to think about action and being at all times unselfish as opposed to selfish, and having that being sort of a guiding principle.
I think it's also linked to Ruskin's larger notion of the law of help, which he articulates in Modern Painters 5. This whole notion of the interconnectedness of everyone in society, that there are no disposable people, that everyone is indispensable to everyone else, and we don't see social relations in their moral dimension until we understand that we're all connected, that the crimes committed against the poor are finally crimes that will redound to us as well, so that we are responsible in this existential way for each other.
Gabriel, I would only add to that, not just this fundamentally, your word existential is very important here. We are responsible for each other throughout our lives. That's the whole idea of unto this last. That's what the kingdom of heaven is like. Human beings take care of one another, are essentially set up, their lives are structured so that they will and need to take care of one another. When we do, we thrive. When we don't, we suffer.
People be good, to give what in some ways a Ruskin joke, but also very to the point. Anybody who's not aware, Ruskin sort of tells of his first sermon being people be good, or indeed playing out it being a priest to the small child, and his sermon was people be good.
I'm given to understand that Ruskin sort of went out of favor in America in the early 20th century, like the maybe post-World War I, 20s, 30s or so. And I wonder if that has to do with the whole cult of rugged individuality that was popular at that time.
Yes, I think that's a good observation, because I think that Ruskin, well, it's that business of selfishness, isn't it? If you put yourself first rather than the condition of your fellow mankind around you, then inevitably, your priority or your value are, from Ruskin's point of view, in the wrong place. And also, I think it is the case, certainly in England, it was the case that the early Labour Party, which of course is seen as a socialist party, in the early years of the 20th century, did read a lot of Ruskin, actually read unto this last very, very carefully. It was very influential text on them. The fact that Ruskin makes it clear that he's not writing as a socialist doesn't gainsay the fact that he had huge impact on politicians of all colours, in fact, in terms of thinking about society and about the political economy. We tend never to talk about the political economy. We talk about politics or economics, as if somehow economics doesn't have to worry about politics. It just gets on with being a big money machine. But of course, what Ruskin's talking about is something that's intimately linked. The lives of everyone are affected by the political economy, which embraces the economy.
I was just wondering what Ruskin would have had to say about the eugenics movement, which became very popular both sides of the Atlantic just after he died. So beginning of the 20th century, starting in England, unfortunately, and then spreading to America, this idea that you should segregate the poor, you should segregate the disabled, you should keep them away, you shouldn't let them breed, you shouldn't let them contaminate the race. So utterly opposed to his ideas. It's almost as if he had to die before the eugenicists could actually prosper in any way, because I can just imagine what he would have had to say to them. And of course, eugenics having its kind of apex with the final solution and the Nazis' idea of purging a whole race. But early, something I'm working on at the moment is dealing with this. 1905 to 1920, it was actually fashionable to be a eugenicist and to treat the poor as if they really literally should be put away like criminals and be put out of sight. Exactly the opposite of what Ruskin says.
And that's true also of people who like the mentally ill and other
alienists, to put
sort
them
of
away.
seen as some people who are seen as in some way imperfect.
Best not to see them, which is just, and that's the beginning. That's the first step of dehumanizing.
Mm-hmm.
If they're physically othered and put somewhere else, then it's easier to dehumanize them. And having dehumanized them, you can then monster them. And
hence his argument, and to me, it's absolutely clear here. If you educate them, they will get stronger and do much better. If you feed them, they will get healthier and do much better. So he absolutely, I think, fundamentally is always on the side of education and strengthening. That's the concept of consumption, which is at the heart of this essay.
Well, and also not seeing classes of people as alien to each other, but as fundamentally belonging to each other and responsible to each other.
So as the timekeeper, I'm going to suggest that we do proceed. And Jim, I'm going to make one suggestion, which is that as this is the very final passage or passages of the final essay of this endeavour, and as our readers each know which section they have to read, I'm going to suggest that we try and let the text run seamlessly between the readers. And then we will, and one reader just follow on when the previous reader has finished, which then releases you, Jim, from feeling you have to kind of call up the next speaker. And that way we will sort of culminate in that wonderful last paragraph that you spoke about so eloquently in the rehearsal we had. So if you're comfortable with that, Jim, that will be my invitation to the speakers, is that we each run just one on from the other and you just hand over seamlessly from the text. And then we will have plenty of time, I imagine 15-20 minutes at the end, for further discussion and reflection to bring things
That's fine with me. Good idea.
Okay.
Rachel.
These three, that is, remedies for overpopulation, are, in brief, colonization, bringing in of wastelands, or discouragement of marriage. The first and second of these expedients merely evade or delay the question. It will, indeed, be long before the world has been all colonized, and its deserts all brought under cultivation. But the radical question is not how much habitable land is in the world, but how many human beings ought to be maintained on a given space of habitable land. Observe, I say ought to be, not how many can be. Ricardo, with his usual inaccuracy, defines what he calls the natural rate of wages as that which will maintain the labourer. Maintain him? Yes, but how? The question was instantly thus asked of me by a working girl, to whom I read the passage. I will amplify her question for her. Maintain him how? As, first, to what length of life? Out of a given number of fed persons, how many are to be old? How many young? That is to say, will you arrange their maintenance so as to kill them early, say at 30 or 35 on average, including deaths of weakly or ill-fed children? Or so as to enable them to live out a natural life? You will feed a greater number in the first case by rapidity of succession, probably a happier number in the second. Which does Mr. Ricardo mean to be their natural state? And to which state belongs the natural rate of wages? Again, a piece of land which will only support 10 idle, ignorant, and improvident persons will support 30 or 40 intelligent and industrious ones. Which of these is their natural state, and to which of them belongs the natural rate of wages? Again, if a piece of land support 40 persons in industrious ignorance, and if, tired of this ignorance, they set apart 10 of their number to study the properties of cones and the sizes of stars, the labours of these 10 being withdrawn from the ground must either tend to the increase of food in some transitional manner, or the person set aside for sidereal and conic purposes must starve, or someone else starve instead of them. What is therefore the natural rate of wages of the scientific person, and how does this rate relate to or measure their reverted or transitional productiveness? Again, if the ground maintains at first 40 labourers in a peaceable and pious state of mind, but they become in a few years so quarrelsome and impious that they have to set apart 5 to meditate upon and settle their disputes, 10 armed to the teeth with costly instruments to enforce the decisions, and 5 to remind everybody, in an eloquent manner, of the existence of a God. What will be the result upon the general power of production? And what is the natural rate of wages of the meditative, muscular, and oracular labourers?
Leaving these questions to be discussed or waived at their pleasure by Mr. Ricardo's followers, I proceed to state the main facts bearing on that probable future of the laboring classes which has been partially glanced at by Mr. Mill. That chapter and the preceding one differ from the common writing of political economists in admitting some value in the aspect of nature and expressing regret at the probability of the destruction of natural scenery. But we may spare our anxieties on this head. Men can neither drink steam nor eat stone. The maximum of population on a given space of land implies also the relative maximum of edible vegetable, whether for men or cattle. It implies a maximum of pure air and of pure water. Therefore, a maximum of wood to transmute the air, and of sloping ground protected by herbage from the extreme heat of the sun to feed the streams. All England may, if it so chooses, become one manufacturing town, and Englishmen, sacrificing themselves to the good of general humanity, may live diminished lives in the midst of noise, of darkness, and of deadly exhalation. But the world cannot become a factory nor a mine. No amount of ingenuity will ever make iron digestible by the million, nor substitute hydrogen for wine. Neither the avarice nor the rage of men will ever feed them. And however the apple of Sodom and the grape of Gomorrah may spread their table for a time with dainties of ashes and nectar of asps, so long as men live by bread, the faraway valleys must laugh as they are covered with the gold of God, and the shouts of his happy multitudes ring round the winepress and the well.
Nor need our more sentimental economists fear the too widespread of the formalities of a mechanical agriculture. The presence of a wise population implies the search for felicity as well as for food. Nor can any population reach its maximum but through that wisdom which rejoices in the habitable parts of the earth. The desert has its appointed place and work. The eternal engine, whose beam is the earth's axle, whose beat is its year, and whose breadth is its ocean, will still divide imperiously to their desert kingdoms bound with unfurrowable rock, and swept by unarrested sand their powers of frost and fire. But the zones and lands between, habitable, will be loveliest in habitation. The desire of the heart is also the light of the eyes. No scene is continually and entirely loved, but one rich by joyful human labor, smooth in field, fair in garden, full in orchard, trim, sweet, and frequent in homestead, ringing with voices of vivid existence. No air is sweet that is silent. It is only sweet when full of low currents of undersound, triplets of birds, and murmur and chirp of insects, and deep-toned words of men, and wayward trebles of childhood. As the art of life is learned, it will be found at last that all lovely things are also necessary. The wild flower by the wayside, as well as the tended corn, and the wild birds and creatures of the forest, as well as the tended cattle, because man doth not live by bread only, but also by the desert manna, by every wondrous word and unknowable work of God. Happy in that he knew them not, nor did his fathers know, and that round about him reaches yet into the infinite the amazement of his existence.
Note finally that all effectual advancement toward this true felicity of the human race must be by individual, not public effort. Certain general measures may aid, certain revised laws guide such advancement, but the measure and law which have first to be determined are those of each man's home. We continually hear it recommended by sagacious people to complaining neighbors, usually less well placed in the world than themselves, that they should remain content in the station in which Providence has placed them. There are perhaps some circumstances of life in which Providence has no intention that people should be content. Nevertheless, the maxim is on the whole a good one, but it is peculiarly for home use. That your neighbor should or should not remain content with his position is not your business. But it is very much your business to remain content with your own. What is chiefly needed in England at the present day is to show the quantity of pleasure that may be obtained by a consistent, well-administered competence, modest, confessed, and laborious. We need examples of people who, leaving heaven to decide whether they are to rise in the world, decide for themselves that they will be happy in it, and have resolved to seek not greater wealth, but simpler pleasure, not higher fortune, but deeper felicity, making the first of possessions self-possession, and honoring themselves in the harmless pride and calm pursuits of peace. Of which lowly peace it is written that justice and peace have kissed each other, and that the fruit of justice is sown in peace of them that make peace. Not peacemakers in the common understanding, reconcilers of quarrels, although that function also follows on the greater one, but peace creators, givers of calm, which you cannot give unless you first gain, nor is this gain one which will follow assuredly on any course of business commonly so called. No form of gain is less probable, business being essentially restless and probably contentious, having a raven-like mind to the motion to and fro as to the carrion food, whereas the olive feeding and bearing birds look for rest for their feet. Thus it is said of wisdom that she hath builded her house and hewn out her 7 pillars. And even when, though apt to wait long at the doorposts, she has to leave her house and go abroad, her paths are peace also.
For us, at all events, her work must begin at the entry of the doors. All true economy is law of the house. Strive to make that law strict. Sorry. Are you hearing me? My audio's been cutting in and out.
Yes, we hear you, Jim.
Okay. Strive to make that law strict, simple, generous, waste nothing, and grudge nothing. Care in no wise to make more of money, but care to make much of it, remembering always the great, palpable, inevitable fact, the rule and root of all economy, that what one person has, another cannot have, and that every atom of substance of whatever kind, used or consumed, is so much human life spent, which, if it issue in the saving present life or gaining more, is well spent, but if not, is either so much life prevented or so much slain. In all buying, consider first what condition of existence you cause in the producers of what you buy. Secondly, whether the sum you have paid is just to the producer and in due proportion lodged in his hands. Thirdly, to how much clear use for food, knowledge, or joy this that you have bought can be put. And fourthly, to whom and in what way it can be most speedily and serviceably distributed. In all dealings whatsoever, insisting on entire openness and stern fulfillment, and in all doings on perfection and loveliness of accomplishment, especially on fineness and purity of all marketable commodity, watching at the same time for all ways of gaining or teaching powers of simple pleasure and of showing the sum of enjoyment depending not on the quantity of things tasted, but on the vivacity and patience of taste, which, Simon, I'm going to break the rule for a moment. Howard, we're coming to the last paragraph of all of Unto This Last, and it's just for you to have a go at it.
And if, on due and honest thought over these things, it seems that the kind of existence to which men are now summoned by every plea of pity and claim of right may, for some time at least, not be a luxurious one, consider whether, even supposing it guiltless, luxury would be desired by any of us if we saw clearly at our sides the suffering which accompanies it in the world. Luxury is indeed possible in the future, innocent and exquisite, luxury for all and by the help of all. But luxury at present can only be enjoyed by the ignorant. The cruelest man living could not sit at his feast unless he sat blindfold. Raise the veil boldly, face the light, and if as yet the light of the eye can only be through tears, and the light of the body through sackcloth, go thou forth weeping, bearing precious seed, until the time come and the kingdom when Christ's gift of bread and bequest of peace shall be unto this last as unto thee. And when for earth severed multitudes, the wicked and the weary, there shall be holier reconciliation than that of the narrow harm and calm economy, where the wicked cease not from trouble, but from troubling, and the weary are at rest.
And thank you very much, dear friends and dear readers. It's been beautifully done, and we are so appreciative of everybody who's tuned in today. Simon, Gavin, take us through the last 2 minutes.
So, thank you all. We have time for anybody to reflect, observe. I'm thinking particularly for those of you who have been with us on this entire journey and have heard all or almost all of the readings. I mean, everyone is welcome. Anyone is welcome to comment, reader, audience, and so on. But I just be very interesting if anyone who has sat through the majority or all of the sessions, any reflections you have on this text, particularly perhaps if it's new to you, or it was a text you didn't know well. Please feel free to chip in. We've got a few minutes, and then I'll play this little video we have from one of our colleagues, Peter Berman, who couldn't be present this evening, and then we'll bring things to a conclusion. But if anyone wants to chip in, please feel free to do so.
Well, I'm not going to chip in with much substance, but I am going to say that I've been studying this text now for a quarter century, and every time I go through it, the beauty of the words, the brilliance of the composition just overwhelms me. Some of the passages in here are just the most glorious that Ruskin ever set down, and that is saying something. And we are privileged, I think that was Pamela's word from much earlier, we are privileged to have had the chance to read them and share them together.
Wait, hello.
Oh.
Hi, you all right?
Just muting somebody who's got to answer the phone. Anyone else want to?
But thank you very much, everybody, for reading the text so beautifully. Especially, I love the last part so much, and I think this is the time of that sweaty labor and the slop shop, and maybe that the Ruskin knew that all the pain of the laborers, and especially I didn't notice that he was talking about he was reading the paragraph to the female worker. And I just wondered that what kind of occasion was that? Yeah. But anyway, thank you. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed your reading so much.
Thank you, Chucky.
I was thinking about this in the prism of what we writers are facing up to at the moment, which is AI, which may make us redundant, or it may make us redundant for the wrong kind of reasons. And we have to think about how to, not AI and computers are diminishing the quality of work that a lot of people can do or have that potential. And we have to find a way to live a good life. In section 83, he's talking about that a lot, about whatever you're left with, you have to find a way to live with it gracefully. And it seems to have a whole new application in the context of us who are becoming profession poor because of AI.
I'm glad you mentioned passage 83, because it's one that I hadn't really noticed before. And again, I've read this more than once in the past, and this time it did really strike me that notion of, how did he word it? Not greater wealth, but simpler pleasure, not higher fortune, but deeper felicity. Again, just really striking in the midst of, I suppose, what's going on globally at the moment. And yeah. And so I'm pleased that you've drawn attention to that one, Michelle.
I have a reflection that I suppose from the experience of being in all of the readings, but particularly this last essay, which is reflecting on the outrage that these essays met with, and hence Thackeray having to sort of ask Ruskin to desist. And I was thinking of a modern parallel in the UK, which is that there has been over the last few years a young British footballer who is black, who's in the English soccer team, as you would say in the US, called Marcus Rashford. And he, from a very young age, I think 19, started to draw attention to the fact that there were a lot of impoverished children who weren't being fed school meals or didn't have access to nutrition in holidays, and I think during lockdown and after lockdown. And he led a big campaign, which did lead to the government changing the rules to provide more funding for food. And what I was struck by was the ferocity of the pushback from the capitalist status quo, from particularly the right-wing media in the UK, who have done their best ever since to tear into him. If he's seen having fun, if he's seen having spent any money on his own clothing or driving a nice car, he's described immediately as a hypocrite, a monstrous hypocrite. And we all know, of course, that Ruskin, traveled to Venice with his cook and his valet and in his private, with his private means and so on. It's so striking how powerfully the status quo will defend itself in the face of anybody very, very quietly. Not exactly, Ruskin wasn't exactly being quiet, but in a very simple way will just point out that what is accepted isn't actually fair or right. And that for me has been one of the powerful experiences of listening to these texts, is this sense in which Ruskin would be admired by many, I'm sure, but he would be torn into just as violently, probably more violently than he was by his critics in his own day, because there is such an entrenchment that those who have should continue to flourish and those who have not should fend for themselves in a lot of political discourse. That's been one of my observations today.
I can't say it's a comfy read. It does make you feel bad about yourself. It makes you feel bad about your privilege. It makes you terribly aware of it. And in a very personal way, he has that gift of writing gracefully in a way that also is extremely discomforting to our self-love. We could all do better. We know specifically how we could do better after listening to this.
It was read very early in the conversation today, his line, error colossal as well as strange. And I think that we still labor under the error colossal being that we think we've been taught since we were little terrible things, not terrible things, little lovely things, that we're being made into more greedy things. We are taught that you can buy life and that life only happens when you have enough money to purchase it. Otherwise, you're just limping along and you're not really a great success in life. I think Ruskin is fighting directly against that notion from the first words of this essay and in so much of what he wrote. You cannot buy life. You can live life. You can love life. You can enjoy life. You can get pleasure out of almost everything. And that paragraph that we were talking about a moment ago, learn to love it, learn to enjoy it, learn to exploit it, not in a negative sense, but in a positive sense, for all that it can give you in terms of living well in the time that you have. He is always for that, availing towards life.
It's really an incredible journey. I mean, really, the way that he makes these observations, and he takes different positions throughout all of these observations, which makes you think that he's saying one thing when he's really saying something else. So he's sort of like, trying very, very hard to change people's hearts and minds with this. With every ounce of strength he has, that's what he's doing. He believes, this is fundamentally, what is going to make the world better, and this is his greatest contribution to humankind, which is really pretty stupendous when you consider all that he has written about it, and how wondrous his writing is, and the fabulous words that he has to say to us, and the way that he opens everything up, and the way that he looks at things in such a different way, and he forces you you're right, Michelle. You know, he forces you to think about yourself as well, and makes you realize the great gifts that we all have. That, you know, where, you know, to withhold anything is weakness, actually.
But I think he's also amazing, as well as analysing the problems with the political economy. And obviously he was writing a long time ago, but so many of his points are so pertinent. But he also gives us small pointers, small practical things of how we can do things, make a difference, you know, from you know, in all buying, consider first what condition of existence you cause and the producers of what you buy, which fits with the modern mantra: shop local, don't waste stuff, don't waste food. So he was just all these small messages mean that we actually, if we listen to them, can do small things, not feel bad about ourselves, but let's actually go in a positive direction and take on board some of these suggestions of how to live and live simply but well.
Yeah, I was going to add to just to be a bit more optimistic about the message, to the from the most famous passage, the point about widest helpful influence. And that is something that actually anybody in almost in any position can exercise, even in a small way. If we're exercising our widest helpful influence, and actually just to pick up and link to what Simon said about Marcus Rashford, the footballer, he's an influencer in the modern way of being somebody who's on social media influencing. But most influencers on social media are influencing people to buy stuff. I mean, they're being paid to influence people to explore the luxuriousness of the world that Ruskin rails against. And I think there is something in that widest helpful influence phrase that actually everyone can take away and use in a positive way, even if it challenges us, as Michelle says, to see the things that we're not doing. I think it gives us all that hope, as Francis mentioned, of finding small things that we can do to use any influence that we might have.
Which, thank you, Andrew, is a nice way to get to our real conclusion. Talk about doing things that help others as they get along their way. These sessions have been, for me, just that. We've had a sort of a world conference on Ruskin, I believe, for the first time, because people can tune in from all across the world. Thank you for getting up so early, so many of you, to be part of our discussion. And now we need to say thank you. We certainly need to say thank you to Simon for all the work, and we probably don't know the 10th of it, that he did in order to make these sessions come off as beautifully as they have. And we have to thank Peter Berman for the wonderful idea to read onto this last and have a public session about it. And I do think that we have a few words from Peter, who was so instrumental in making all of this eventuate, that we can play for us as we bring all of this to our end.
Thank you, Jim, for your very kind words. Let me share my screen. Just bear with me a moment, and I'll play the little film that Peter made. So just to reinforce what Jim said, Peter Berman is on the board of the Guild. He was extremely sad to be committed elsewhere for tonight's final session. If he could have cut himself in two, he would have been here. He was the person who first conceived of these Zoom live reading sessions 3 years ago. He chose the texts for each season, and he issued all the initial invitations to participate, trying to get the balance of speakers and countries and as varied a variety of voices and perspectives as possible. So we asked him, as he couldn't be here tonight, if he'd like to just reflect very personally on the series, but also what the purpose of reading Ruskin aloud means to him. So let me just play you that now. Just bear with me.
Coming to the end of the third series of annual readings from Ruskin, I find myself asking myself, why do we do it? And I think the most important reason for me is that it's just such a pleasure reading Ruskin aloud. so much of his prose is really prose poem. So beautiful, it strikes home time and again. And reading in a small circle, I have felt, not for the first time, that it has been rather like playing chamber music, where everyone hanging on to their own part, like grim death, but at the same time, knitting in what we read or what we say in a seamless fabric with the contributions of the others who are reading. And above all, reading aloud, I think, enables you to stay focused. I remember quite vividly that in the first reading, one of our readers who had read beautifully said that when he read Ruskin quietly to himself, it was awfully tempting to skip the occasional paragraph. But if we're reading aloud and together, we have to read every word and give every word its weight. So I thought that was a jolly good reason too. So who do we do it for? Primarily, I suppose, for our members of Ruskin's own guild of St. George, and our friends, and people who, for one reason or another, heard about the readings and want to join us. And what I've noticed is that our friendships have grown as a result of doing this, grown across national and international borders, for example. Julia in Florence has rekindled my interest in reading the poets Robert Browning and Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And it was just because of something she said at one of the readings. It struck home, and it was inspired, undoubtedly, by Ruskin. So the Guild has members in something like a dozen countries, and quite by accident, with perhaps a little management, we've had participants from quite a number of the countries where there are guilds, men and women. India, for example, Russia, that was exciting. The United States of America, Italy, especially Venice, as you might expect, and Florence. Japan, very loyal attendance from Japan, and a dear friend from Germany who took part in Ruskin and the Crafts last winter too. So altogether, I felt it to be a very special experience, bringing our hearts and our minds together, paying attention to each other, learning from each other, sharing our enthusiasm. One of the readers in the fourth session was Andrew Hill, the author of that wonderful book, Ruskin Land. And I think what I grabbed from that book myself is the extraordinary relevance of Ruskin to today. And I think that our readings have reinforced that message of relevance, particularly perhaps through Unto This Last. I chose it especially because I found it so difficult reading it on my own. And I found it so enriching reading it with dear friends, members of the Guild and others who have wanted to take part in this particular series. And it reminds me to say that we should, like Ruskin, act in the moment. It was not for nothing that his motto, his personal motto, was today, today.
There we are. And so we come to the end of this series. And can I add my final thanks? First of all, to our readers today, Tyson, Rachel, Howard, Pamela, Gabriel, and our convener, Jim, for your sonorous and heartfelt readings from the final essay and your reflections that you've shared. Thank you to all of the speakers from our previous sessions, some of whom delighted to say are with us today. And thank you also to our audience for listening and for commenting where you have. And I want to say, as this is being recorded, to our future audience, because these all appear on YouTube and then on the Guild's website, where already earlier sessions are being watched by other people and picked up and noticed. And to reiterate what was said at the very start, which is that after 3 winter-spring series of these readings from Ruskin, we do hope and anticipate that we will present another series, probably at the start of 2025, and we would welcome any thoughts you might have on which text or texts you would like to see considered for inclusion. We have many millions of wonderful words to choose from. But if there is a particular text that for you speaks of these times or of the Guild, of which many of you are members, your own interests, your own concerns, your own inspiration, and you want to email the Guild, there are email addresses on the website, please feel free to throw in your thoughts. And I'm sure many of us and others will gather the next time we come together to read from Ruskin. But for now, I'm going to end this recording and formally declare Unto This Last is now complete.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Peter.